Welcome to Season 2 of Making Pondo and Talking Pondo. Talking Pondo is a podcast where Cliff and Marty give each other a film to watch and talk about them in detail. Some episodes will include a special guest. Making Pondo is a podcast where Cliff and Marty talk to people they have worked with and discuss their experiences on set. All right, Marty, we are back.
We're back and we're talking. And
That's
my
right.
air condition decided to turn on right now. You probably can't hear it anyway, but tell the people what the show's about.
I'm gonna de-hum it. We're gonna de-hum it. Anyway, so the show is about it's about an hour long usually, but no, it's talking Pondo. Marty and I, we give each other a movie and we discuss what we liked or didn't like about it.
We're already up to 39 of these things. Here we are, well into season 2. It's spooky season. If you're hearing this when it's originally out, and so we're doing 2 more horror films for you this week. Horror in quotation marks. It's you be the judge here. We went a little crazy this week.
I think we solidly landed in horror with both of these films. I just think they're different types of horror.
Yes, they are, and yet they're both trying to drive you insane.
No shit. No shit.
We watched the Texas Chainsaw, 2 words,
Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes. The original, 1974, right. Not the remake. Remake is perfectly fine, but we watched the original, and then we watched another movie that I can't believe is already 5 years old at the time of this recording. Wow, when the world shut down, I lost track of a couple years there. It's unbelievable that the Lighthouse is already almost 5 years old.
Yep.
So, I mean, what to talk about first? I guess Saw should go first. I mean,
yeah, it's the older of the two. It's the bigger brother. Let's go ahead and talk about it first.
I mean, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What is there to be said that hasn't been said a million times before? You know, these 5 kids will run out of gas and go poking around where they're not supposed to, and the next thing you know, one by one is.
Well, they don't. First off, they don't run out of gas. They're going to run out of gas.
Oh yeah,
they know that they need gas to keep going, so they've pulled over to get gas. They haven't run out of gas. They're not fucking stranded. They could start this fucking minivan and drive another 20 or 30 miles easily. Probably more than that because it's a VW and it gets pretty decent gas mileage. But no, they're like, well, we need gas, we'll pull over. And then insanity ensues, basically.
Now, what's different about this movie than a lot of the movies that come after it, because there were certainly no movies like this that come before it, is it immediately tries to unsettle you right from the beginning. It sets its tone and its mood and its atmosphere right from the beginning, opening sequences where there's a lot of just rhubarb and sounds and weird noise and just trying to make the whole thing off-putting. It's like starting your movie with this shower sequence of Psycho rather than building to it. And so a lot of these movies, we have a slow burn until something finally happens scary 20 minutes in. This one's like immediately like, this is fucking weird. This is insane. Now we're looking at fucking stock footage of the moon and Mars and retrograde or whatever all that space footage was.
You're talking about
we roll into the slow.
You're talking about the dead bodies and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's throwing you right into the deep end.
Yeah, there's
settling imagery.
Yeah. Well, I looking back on it now and with having seen the film, I realize it's kind of a foreshadowing of the fetishizing that Leatherface and his family does.
That's true too. Yeah.
With these dead bodies and things, and obviously that's what's being dug up and so on. It'd been a while since I've seen this one. It's not one that I normally go back to. I don't know why.
You hadn't seen it since the VHS days, right?
So yeah, since cable. I might have seen it on DVD once after that at some point. But the first thing I'll say is I watched a Blu-ray copy, and fuck, the movie has never looked that good. Like this movie, I don't know what terrible transfer that they fed us on VHS and on cable, and to be fair, it lent to kind of the overall terror of the film, this kind of muddy, murky picture. But the film I watched was very clear, very well made,
Yeah.
Everything in focus. Coloring is really
Yeah.
nice at times. There's some really nice dolly shots around the house as they're coming in and out. And I'm just
Daniel
like,
Hell.
man, you can see that they
Yeah.
full on just that's a nice arc dolly shot that they're doing, which means, I mean, either they set up track or they've got a really nice, you know, rig that they're pushing through there somehow, or they've. I'd be interested to see behind the scenes. Did they rig something together? Did they actually bring out a dolly system? But because the camera moved much more than I expected it to. In my memory, I just remember the movie being much more static,
Right.
much more claustrophobic. Um, and maybe that's because, again, 4:3 television. I'm losing the sides, pan
Hmm.
and scan.
You don't get to
Um,
see the chasing through the branches and the close up, close up, close up.
exactly, exactly.
And it's more visceral, and
Hmm.
you feel it.
For me, I didn't. I kind of disagree with the whole building of the dread early. I feel like that there's a lot of radio exposition. We go from this radio exposition to this guy in a wheelchair trying to take a piss and falling down a hill, which they all are just like, well, pick him up, throw him in the
Oh,
van,
then
let's
we've gotten
go.
into kind of the slow part. Yeah.
It's like, well, but it's a, I
Slow
don't
burn,
know.
I should
It's
say.
the beginning's a little rocky for me.
Hmm.
Once the hitchhiker gets on the bus, that's Ed Neal, right?
Yeah.
Once he gets on the bus, it starts to get a little weirder. But it's got a like I just kept hearing in the back of my mind like Night Riders, but the fucking motorcycle movie. I kept
Oh,
for
yeah.
some reason
There's
it
that
just
indie vibe.
there was a weird hearkening to that.
Well, see, this
Um,
does pull from things like Night of the Living Dead as well, which was only a mere 6 years before
hmm
of
hmm
trying to set that, it's like, kind of level of dread, and then people kept trying to put that into their movie. And that
um,
Hitchhiker's very Manson-esque as well, because that was only a few years before too when this came out. So
yeah, it's weird.
totally weird. It's one of
The
the
minute I
weirdest
pitch
movies
the minute
ever
I
made.
the minute I pick up a hitchhiker and he cuts himself, I'm pulling over and be like, "Get the fuck out, dude!" Like,
Oh
I'm not gonna entertain that shit. What is anyway? Um, yeah, uh, it's a movie that definitely sits with you for a while because it's not a movie that's super bloody.
no, it's
Like
PG-13 almost in that respect.
it's very close. It's
But it's
got
all in the mind. It's
mhm.
Hitchcockian in the way it's setting up the dread and doesn't show you.
I mean, he hangs her on the hook, and I guess that's kind of graphic, but we don't really see it. Like
Yeah, it's a magic
in
trick.
today's
Psycho.
modern horror, we would cut to the backside of that shot and
Yeah.
see the blade, the hook pierce her back as she's hung, and then we cut
Mhm.
to a close up of her spitting up some blood and screaming, and then we cut back to Leatherface doing what he's doing, right? But instead, Toby just stays on the whole shot, hangs her up, you know, and I kind of like that. It's
Mhm.
less torture porn esque in a way.
Right. It's what builds up in your mind is way worse than what's going on in the screen, but what's going
Hmm.
on in the screen can feed your mind. Like for me, there's a lot of nostalgia because when I was a really young kid, this movie scared the living shit out of me. I didn't want anything to do with it. It just petrified me. And it's because of just like the opening sequence was enough to make me feel like something worse was coming, that it still has that. That's why I was talking about that it starts with that moment of dread in the beginning. But of course I could see a modern audience who have no nostalgia for it maybe thinking the movie was a little slow to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's sort of it. Well, like I said, once Ed gets into the
It is
car,
50 years
starts
old
to pick
now.
up. It's weird that he cuts that dude with a straight razor, and then like 2 seconds later, after they kick him out, the chick's like, "Here, let me read your horoscope," and he's just crying. And like all I could think of was, I was kind of like, I don't. I'm okay if Leatherface kills these kids. They're fucking
Yeah,
annoying.
yeah,
Shut up
Franklin's
with the
the real
astrology
horror.
already.
Yeah, Franklin is the real horror. And the more things change, the more they don't, right? Because this movie is, to get into a little bit of my notes here ahead of time, is it's the liberal free kids versus the deranged, deformed, conservative rednecks. Nothing really changes too much at its core. But to
Yeah,
get to a further point of
it's the
this is
rednecks and the hippies meeting.
right, and this is
Yeah.
the first youth horror film. It's also the first final girl movie as well. Before
Mm,
this, most of your horror movies were about monsters or the upper class or older people. Now the kids are the victims. And I think that's what makes these type of movies more unsettling for some people, because it's too direct. It's like, oh shit, now I'm right in the line of it. That's why I love Scream so much, because it takes that and it flips it over again. But this one, I feel like if you take Psycho and Faster Pussycat Kill Kill and Last House on the Left, you put them all together and you get the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in a way. Where Texas Chainsaw Massacre is kind of like the Pulp Fiction horror movie of its time. It's the one that figured out how to take all these rough elements from these other movies that were pushing and kind of homogenize them all together in this one weirdo pastiche. The first real psychedelic horror film in a way. And that's why the sequels don't work. Because you can't make this movie twice. This movie's too
mm,
fucking weird. It's
mm-hmm.
a hippie commune came together and knew how to make a movie. Like you were talking about how well it's shot and it's edited really well. Because like you look at Last House on the Left, hey, there's Wes Craven again 2 years before, the guy who's a fucking master, always coming up with the shit first. But his was a more cruder kind of rape revenge movie, Last House on the Left, but it does kind of have that woodsy dread thing. Well, you take it here and they're like, we're going to kind of spit polish this a little bit and make it more acceptable in a way, but more frightening. Even the
Well,
title alone freaked people out of this movie.
I definitely understand what you mean about this, the different elements, because I have a note about the 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 grandpa and the grandma being, dead in the rocking chairs, feeling very psycho. Like, oh, okay, that's that element that they borrowed from, the
Yeah, there's the Ed Gein story
keeping the
again.
dead relevant, keeping the dead relatives, and all that shit. The these people, these hippies kids, they all have that same trope where they're all oblivious to the danger until the danger's
Mhm.
right up their ass, which is
Yeah,
just like,
it's too late to do
it's like,
anything
dude,
about it.
yeah, what are you fucking doing? Like,
It's
you
kind
should
of
have
the
caught this a lot
satire
earlier.
of it in a way. And
Um,
also, it's like, uh, as Joe Bob pointed out when I was listening to his comments about it, it's like, well, in 1973, you could poke your head around people's houses in Texas and ask if anybody was home. And why did we stop doing that? Because of this movie.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Um, you know, the first 30 minutes of the movie is a lot of setup and tension building, but it
Mhm.
also kind of doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
And then the minute the fucking first kill happens, it's like somebody lets the spring loose and it just
hmm
boing,
It
and it's
lulls
off and
you
fucking
until
running,
the
dude.
point. Yeah.
And
It's
I,
just a
you know,
chase sequence.
I appreciate the graphicness of it without wallowing in it. You know, first two kills are basically just sledgehammer kills.
Yeah,
They're
and
really
no
not.
sound, no
They're not
music. Movies
that
hadn't
bad.
done that before at that
Yeah.
point. That must have freaked the audiences right the fuck out.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense because I mean it's very sudden, that first one. He's in there. Hey, what's going on? What? And I don't know what happens to him, but there's a moment right before Leatherface kills him that he looks like he trips or he steps on something.
Oh yeah, yeah. He trips
And,
over like a can or something, and then he looks up, and then whack, he gets hit
yeah,
with that
boom.
hammer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he just goes down like a fucking sack of potatoes. And
I'm sitting there going, and they made a video game out of this?
the
Wow.
twitching is the most graphic part of it.
hmm
But yeah, seeing all the dead VWs in the yard, and you're not immediately like, what the fuck? Let's get
hmm
out of here. You're like,
All that
no.
noise of that generator, and it's like, oh yeah, they got all these freezers going.
Mm-hmm.
And that shot right after that, where Leatherface slams that door shut, and then you go outside, and she gets up and walks from underneath the,
Yeah.
you get that's one of those iconic shots of the
Yeah,
movie, and she's
it's
walking up to the house.
it's
I like
it's
when
really
they.
it's really well done. That dolly's gorgeous.
Mhm.
It's just really well done.
I like very early on when they pick up the hitchhiker and it's that wide shot of just the van and you get to see that big old. There's something about it being nice and clear adds to the
hmm
creepierness because it's
I
more
agree.
visceral, like it's more time machine.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, that those first two kills are basically the stun line kills that Franklin's talking about. And by the way, Franklin's got fucking issues.
Oh,
Um,
Franklin's the real horror of the movie, and they all hated Franklin on set. You talk about method acting.
really
Oh yeah, that's what the legend is that he was a total asshole and nobody liked him.
interesting.
Comes through on camera though.
Yeah, the imagery is it's excellent. It's fucking scary. The fetishizing of the remains is like ancient magic taboo shit, like deep brain stuff, the type of shit that triggers old core memory, DNA memories in people, and just weirds you out completely. It's
And
great.
yet, the same type of special effects in a movie like Iga, and you laugh at it, right? But here, they're making everything just creepy enough to where it changes it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's the difference in knowing how to make a movie and knowing how to create tension and all that type of shit. Hanging the girl from the hook reminded me of hanging Rose from the garage door and Scream.
Mm, I can see
Um,
that.
um,
You
yeah.
know what it reminded me of?
Hmm.
This calling this an alternate title of this movie could be called "Sawing the Person in Half: The Movie." Because that's what we're doing. We're doing the old crazy magic tricks where the audience gasps, but we're doing a movie out of it. Like even the way they shoot that hook scene where it looks like, but she's really just on her suspension thing and it gives the effect of like, oh, like, oh my God,
hmm
that you don't
hmm
actually see it. But that Mandela effect can go crazy in your brain on this one. And people were convinced that this was one of the goriest movies ever made.
To me, the movie's about premise, setup, and intent. Like it
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't do a lot with blood and it doesn't do a lot with gore. It's all about selling you on the thing, like you just said. You know,
Atmosphere. Yeah.
it's atmosphere, and oh, it looks like she's on the hook. Oh, that's terrible. Um, and then I love the way that they tilt the camera at times to give a fucked perspective. They'll just
Mm-hmm.
rock it 10 degrees off, just almost what do they call that? A Dutch over, I think it's
Oh, yeah, yeah.
called. Um, not that, but not to that much of a degree, but just enough to just let the viewer know, like, oh, this is not right. Something's wrong here. It's wonky.
And it does have elements of comedy in it. He's sawing his own front door, and they yell at him for sawing the front door down.
Yeah,
It's like how
yeah.
many times have we gone through this? The sequels try to amplify the comedic element, but here it's balanced just enough where the satire is just under all the horror. Is this a pro vegan movie? A lot of people seem to think it is.
Pro vegan. They're eating people.
Exactly. Look at these crazy meat eaters.
Oh, I okay. That's fucking weird. That's a weird take. Um,
Oh, I
the
didn't
the
make it up.
the night scene with I didn't say you did. I just think it's a weird take. Uh, the night scene with Franklin trying to keep his sister from leaving him in the dark with a fucking flashlight is like,
Yeah,
yeah, let's just leave the crippled guy there alone in the dark. And it's
almost documentary-ish.
yeah. And at one point,
Blair Witch, but way before.
it's almost found footage-ish. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Especially that part. But there's this point where they're both moving towards the house, and one of them goes, "There's a light," and I just couldn't help but think over at the Frankenstein place and
right. Which would be
started
a
laughing
million later.
hysterically.
You
Yeah.
could see both. These are, and they're both classic midnight movies too,
hmm Yeah.
along with Eraserhead, which we'll get into here in a little bit.
Yeah. There's some good classic tropes in here, but when you realize how old this film is, you realize, oh, these aren't classic tropes. They're making these fucking things up as
Yeah.
this is some of the first time you're seeing some of this shit.
Hmm. It all
Um,
stems
this
from
shit that this
this.
shit gets done. That gets done. It's like the bike slide in Akira. that everybody's done over and over again. It's there's so many shots from this film where I was like, I've seen that shot over and
They
over
figured out how to do the conglomerate of everything that came before and just kind of perfectly homogenize it. Like this time, I really saw how this one leads to a mere 4 years later to Halloween, where it's like, okay, I'm going to take the faceless killer, make it even more smooth and just shadowy, and I'm going to take this hillbilly thing, I'll put it in the suburbs and be even more frightening to you. And now you have this version of the slasher. And then what happens Friday the 13th is like, oh, well, we'll take this and then we'll put it back in the fucking woods, right? And so these things just keep growing and feeding off each other. But this viewing around, there was points where I was like, Leatherface is giving me Michael Myers vibes, where he's just this silent, faceless void killer. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see the connections a little better now.
The part where she gets to she's running from Leatherface, and she's at one point she's Brer Rabbit in the thicket patch, literally,
right?
And gets to the barbecue and runs in and closes the door, and that dude's in there, and she's got a knife or a gun, I don't know what she has, and he beats her with a broom. I'm just like, a fucking broom, really? A broom? Like, dude, if you hit me with a broom and I have a knife or a gun, I'm gonna fucking stab you or shoot you. Like, what the hell?
I don't know how that part works in the video game. So
the truck, I love the truck driving stuff, because you could tell they weren't moving that truck at all.
Oh yeah,
but the way that they shot it made it worked. It really, really worked. I loved all the angles that they used and the way that they did that.
That technique. Yeah.
It was really well done. Toby's he's a great visual filmmaker. He really is. I mean,
you can see how he hooked up with Spielberg, and
I really appreciate his technique. He's really good. Most of the shots are interesting. The further we get into the film, the more interesting the shots get, in my opinion. Watching someone discipline Leatherface is always a fun thing to see. Yeah, that last part is like a weird victim's POV into a fucked up, like, incest ass, weird ass family, and it's just like, what the yeah. I have a note here that says it feels like they hit this point in the script of bringing the victim back alive and went, okay, now what? And just went batshit crazy. Like, once they finally get her, like, now what are we gonna do? I'm like, well, we're gonna feed Grandpa. We're gonna cut her finger and we're gonna feed Grandpa. That's creepy as fuck. The shot choices, the composition, the camera movement, they're just so good.
And we only have 5 minutes of the movie at that point. It's just raw chaos. And she breaks out the window, and it's almost like we're in a different movie again, because now it's daytime, which is also weird in a horror movie for the insane shit to still be going on in the morning hours.
Yeah, and there's a point there where I felt like the squeals of the victim were like screams of a hog or something. It sounded like a hog farm or something.
They're taking it back to the slaughterhouse.
Yeah, and it had the audio was great. That's the other thing. The audio, whoever did the audio did a fantastic job of building a really good sound bed. The sound, it's a creepy sounding fucking movie. And every the audio is there with intent. It's not just dialogue.
That truck driver shows up and just the right time, and
yeah, that classic ending scene is a doozy, man. Why get out of the truck? I don't know. Do the dance for me, baby.
Yeah,
and then and only a minute of fucking credits, dude. That's another one of these movies where it just runs right up to the end.
Yep, John Larroquette, opening sequence. He's the narrator in the beginning. But at the end credits, there's nothing. It's just Leatherface is very upset because somebody got away. Nobody's supposed to get away. Nobody's supposed to know what the fuck is going on. So if you count part 2 as canon, when they go back to look, everything's gone. Because, of course, they have many different hiding spots throughout the states. But if you count it as just this one original, it's kind of this, like, you feel the pain of Leatherface at the end of the movie, like, fuck. It's like, oh, there's going to be hell to pay
There's
because
gonna be
she
hell to
was
pay.
not supposed to fucking escape.
Nope.
And so she becomes the first final girl. Now, the one they made for.
Well, isn't there a final girl in Night of the Living Dead though?
Oh, no, everybody dies in that movie.
Even the girl dies in that movie. Okay,
Oh,
it's been a
yeah,
while since
she
I've
dies
seen that one.
pretty early on. That's why one of the things I appreciated about Get Out was like, hey, that guy lived. He didn't get shot in the head by rednecks at the end of the movie like Walking Dead. It was refreshing to see that be flipped.
Right.
I'm sure there might be some pseudo examples of the final girl, but as far as like your classic slasher, I think this is recognized as not only the first youth horror film with that respect, but also the one that introduces that trope too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, again, I hadn't seen it in a long time, but I did enjoy my viewing of it.
Mhm.
I was surprised. It's length is good. Once you get past that first 20 minutes or so, pacing really picks up, and
Yeah, that's supposed to
especially
be the
once you get to
lull.
that first kill, it's just bam, 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 and off to the races.
Yeah.
So
Next thing you know, you'll
I
be
enjoyed it.
walking around screaming for what's the guy's name they say over and over and over again.
Oh
you
God,
think
Aaron.
you think I'd remember? I think it's a one syllable. All right. Well, anyway, I probably won't subject you to the myriad of sequels, but I can briefly mention on what they are. Part two is the more comedic one, the one from '86 with Dennis Hopper. You got Chainsaw Wars. I've always had a soft spot for that one because back in the day, that was one of the
I
more
remember.
over the top movies that existed.
I
Uh,
remember.
Part three, that's the one that Ken Foray, we just heard him talking about at Mad Monster,
Right.
where they had to reshoot the ending so he could live. And I always thought that's weird because he got chainsawed in the head. How does he show up at the end of the movie? But he does.
He does.
And Leatherface has a brace on his leg in that one, see, because he cut himself at the end of part one. They always tried to
Sure.
put some kind of continuity in. Now,
Sure.
part four, I think, is called The Next Generation or something like that. That's the Matthew McConaughey, Renee Zellweger one.
Right.
That
Right.
one's really bizarre because that's Kim Henkel's movie. The other creative force behind the original Saw was Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel. So part two is what happens when Tobe Hooper makes a sequel by himself. Part four is what happens when Kim Henkel makes a sequel by himself, and you just lean into the weird. So if you like really long
Huh.
McConaughey monologues, it might be worth the
Well, who
goof
doesn't?
watch just for that. Because wow, you got to pay the bill somehow. Then the fifth one was the remake, the Michael Bay one with Jessica Biel. It was okay from what I remember. It wasn't terrible. It's your early aughts horror. And then they made a prequel to that one, Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, which also had Arlie Emery in it. So at least you had that, the dude from Full Metal Jacket. He's
Right.
playing the
Right.
cook type character at
Hmm.
that point. Not a bad recasting. And then after that, I have not seen these. They made Texas Chainsaw 3D, which is the seventh one. Never saw it. Then I believe there's one called Leatherface, which had a limited art house release and has Steven Dorff in it. These actually sound interesting when I'm talking about it this way. And then I think the ninth one, if I'm correct, the ninth one is the one that's just called Texas Chainsaw Massacre that was made for Netflix like a year or two ago. And that one is supposed to be like a Halloween 2018 where we're forgetting everything else and this is direct sequel. It's many years later and now Sally is back looking for Leatherface. And so I hear it's terrible. Ray told me do not watch it. And if he's telling me that, because he'll watch every horror movie, I gave up a long time ago. So that's the history of those films. They keep on trucking, but all you really need is the first one. Second
Yep.
one, okay. But if you feel like
Derivatives,
weird
baby.
movies, but you just can't redo. They never come close to this first one. Any of the sequels, they all try to play it serious or too silly, and this one is just deranged. What was the word you told me when you sent me the
Diabolical.
you said this movie is diabolical.
Yep. And it is.
And then Rex
It's a
Reed say something like, "This movie will not stop until it tries to drive you absolutely insane."
it's a good movie. I mean, I get why people like it. I get why it spawned a bunch of creative um for a bunch of people who took it as a creative force and did their next thing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it makes complete sense.
Yeah, when I
Um,
was, oh, go ahead.
and again, surprisingly, not anywhere near as bloody as I thought it
No,
was going to be. I remember it in my head being much bloodier. I remember it being a much uglier looking fucking film.
no.
But watching that Blu-ray copy, I was like, oh,
Mhm.
shit, this is a nice watch.
Yeah,
Actually, it's
Daniel Pearl's
pretty.
a good DP. He was later
Yeah.
the DP on Zapped. Isn't that
Hmm.
weird? He's also done a couple other movies that I liked. I guess I was picking up on the director of photography all along. Uh, the movie I made in my head when I was a little kid is not the movie that I watch in front of me of these crazy hippies that made this fucking horror film. And you had to wonder if they knew just how terrifying a movie they were making. Who does really know what they're making when they're making it, right? They're hoping they're making something good. I can almost feel like go in there, fall down in the room with the bones. Now you get up and you do a double take at Leatherface and you run out, but somehow when it's all put together, it gels almost as if you're watching real events, which a lot of people seem to think that this movie makes them feel like it's real in a way.
Right.
Now I'm going to share an image with you here. I think I have to do it through my phone. This should go pretty quick. I had this set up. Well, actually, I can just email it to you. Would that be easier if I just email you
Sure.
this image?
Yeah, just email it to me. Or just there's a
Because
chat
this
if you
is,
want to. Oh no, there's no chat. That's right.
yeah, I know it's kind of a pain in the butt. So it won't have a subject line. Here it goes. Okay, so this is the image that I like to think of when I think of this film now, and it's something in filmmaking in general. I'd only seen this image for the first time a few years ago, and it's like it just gives you an idea of what was really going on and how scrappy
Yeah.
that was.
Yeah, that's pretty fucking scrappy, man.
And it's like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, you got a script supervisor holding a battery pack for the camera. You got a I guess that's two cameras. That's two cameras rolling and a
Yeah.
shotgun mic. And I'm sure there's an audio guy off the side of the road there.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then somehow making that crazy ass fucking legendary movie, but they were just, and we don't even need to get into the fact that the initial distributor had mob ties and basically
Hmm.
was the mob, and so that's why this movie that's more than likely the most successful independent film of all time, we can never find out because who has the books?
Yeah.
The people didn't get money for a long time because of the mob shit.
Mm.
But the mob shit also probably, strangely enough, kept this movie alive for a long time too, until eventually, like New Line reissued it in theaters around '83, made $6 million on a theatrical run on a movie that was already available on videotape at the time.
Mm.
So it's just
Well,
crazy how it
that
got
makes
laid.
sense. I mean, the mob controlled a lot of more adult cinema type houses where they could run this type of shit.
Yeah, and this was
Yeah.
career killer shit back in the '70s. This did not have prestige. This was like as bad as porn or shit as people were concerned. It wasn't
Hmm.
until the magic of home video, which is going to be my last point about this movie, and we all start renting all these crazy things. And then the next thing you know, by 1986, Texas Chainsaw Part 2 happens. And of course, it happens in '86, the last year of the hippie filmmaking, as I've called it before we switch into Robocop time and it all gets more futuristic and shit. So, way back when, I had to go to a video store called Video Concepts at the Tucson Mall here in Arizona back in 1982 when we got our first VCR, a top loader. You'd pop the tape in, push it down. And so you had to rent the movies at the mall where they sold the VCR because there wasn't video stores yet, as we know it. They were right around the corner, but they hadn't arrived yet. So all the movies were behind glass cases that were locked. And when you'd have your VHS tape and your beta tape next to it, I'll always remember the taller VHS tape and the smaller beta, the same art, but the smaller tape. And sometimes the VHS tape would have the big oversized box. and
Yeah,
that was always weird. And I was like,
yeah,
why is
we
the
got sold
howling
we got sold a quality bullshit thing with the
right?
Betamax
Yeah.
VHS thing.
I was like, why is the Howling VHS box so big? And then I realized, oh, it's just a big box. So the first three movies we rented, and I had to think about it because I thought Star Wars was one of the first, but Star Wars must have been the second because I think it was rented at the time. We went back and got it a few days later. First three movies we rented were Heaven Can Wait, Warren Beatty,
Ugh.
uh, The Howling, as I
Ugh.
just mentioned, and this little gem of a film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So getting subjected to this movie at 8 years old on fucking top loading VHS was quite the unnerving experience. And it took me
Mm.
many years until I finally watched it all the way through, which strangely enough, the first time I watched this movie all the way through was in a hospital.
Hmm.
I was visiting my stepdad at the time, who was always in and out of the fucking place, as you well know. And so it
Mm.
was just like, I'm just going to finally sit here and watch it. And I remember just being like so freaked out because I'd seen all the other Freddy, Jason, all that shit. And I get to the end of this one and I go, they didn't have a motive. All the
Mm.
other people had a reason. They were like a Bond villain. They were just killing to fucking eat
Yeah,
or
these are
sell
just
or what. I don't know what the fuck was going on.
these are just fucked up people out in the
It's
middle of
just
nowhere.
it's just not explained, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that sat weird with me. And then many years later, probably close to the time I met you, a little bit before, I think, because I was still watching Elvira on Saturday nights every Saturday. And I was watching every horror movie at Duke's Video. So this has got to be getting really close to that time period. Probably the same year. I decided, okay, if I'm watching all this other shit, I can watch this one again. I shouldn't be freaked out by this one again. I've
Right,
already
right.
got past my basket case fears, which for some reason
Sure.
that movie scared me when I was a little kid too. But that's
That
a
movie
whole
was,
other
that's a fucked up movie.
subject. Fucked up movie.
That movie scares for different reasons. It's
And
just
then I
fucking super
later
weird.
like sympathize with the characters in that movie later when I as an adult. But then I decided to sit down by myself, old house, 6 hour speed dubbed copy of the movie. And I watched the whole thing again, and it was like, ooh, it was still freaky, but it was like, oh, I can see why this is. It's not like Reanimator and some of these others where I can put them on and I kind of have fun with it in the background. This one demands your attention, and it's it's just crazy. And so this one's always been a little weird to me. Even the most recent screening, I'm so far away from it. I'm 50, the movie's 50, and it's not the movie that was in my imagination anymore. But damn, if the movie they left behind that they actually did make isn't fucking bizarre and will be talked about for many, many years because it's the Pulp Fiction of horror films in a way, I think. It's the game changer.
I like it. I liked it as a film. It's again not something I normally go to in a horror movie
No,
type thing, but my viewing was like I said I it took me I felt like the film took 20 minutes to get going. Once it got
yeah,
going, it really got going,
like
and
a
just
classic slasher.
yeah, and then that batshit last 15 fucking minutes is just
Hmm.
fucking computer. I mean, it's even worse when she gets away from Leatherface and runs into the gas station. At that point, you're like, oh
Yeah.
fuck, and it gets even worse.
Hmm.
And I definitely like the sudden ending of it,
Yeah.
where boom onto the highway, she jumps into a truck. Oh fucking,
Yeah.
I like that ending a lot more. I thought it was terrifying, and you don't need to resolve anything.
Right.
Leatherface being furious that she's gone and he knows he's going to be in trouble is perfect
Hmm.
ending. Boom, done.
And it's
You
like,
know,
you know, last season you unleashed all this with 70s bleakness with Boy and His Dog. And so now I got to present you with the bleakest view of the 70s cinema. And it's like, yeah, I could see how you could see both of those movies at the drive-in back then and go, that's the 70s for you. That's a pretty
yeah,
good
yeah,
description
it's a
of the
pretty good
nihilism
description.
and the
Yeah,
post-nom and
I
just
feel
all.
like I gave you. I feel like the next movie, the one that we're about to talk about, is my this season's version of A Boy and His Dog for that I gave you.
Well,
That's
I could see how
it's
some
just in
people
that
feel
sort of
like that.
weirdness, but no, I know what you mean, Aldo. For me, I my biggest problem with the movie was the dialogue. It was really tepid at points.
Oh yeah, it's a slasher, but like you compare it to Glass House on the left, it's even more refined. It's still
Mm-hmm.
bad, but it's more refined
Mm-hmm.
in a way. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's not the strongest
And
point of the movie. Is the
and the
dialogue.
first 20 minutes, but I also can't deny what it is and what it did, and that it's fucking genius.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a genius horror movie, especially for the 70s, and especially for having the balls to make something like we just talked about that was one step away from fucking porn for your career. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'd say 4 stars.
That's what I give it as well as 4. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, if you're talking in annals of horror, you could go up to 5, but we tend to talk about, if movies have detriments and what, and it's not a perfect film, but for
No.
what it is, it's a perfect film.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good. Yeah. I liked it. It's good. I enjoyed it. And again, I didn't think I was going to. I was like, fuck, okay, Chainsaw. I
Oh.
hadn't seen that in a while.
So you've never seen it at the theater?
No.
I saw a revival screening once, and it was out of focus after the fucking
No.
first gas scene. I kept hoping it would come back in focus, and it never did. And
No. I would have.
the first Blu-ray of it looks like shit too. The golf
Mm,
ball sized grain, like they didn't get the transfer right. But you must have had the fixed one, because if it looked good and it sounded good, then it's like
yeah.
finally get to see and hear. So many. My last thought on this movie, I think, is so many people have said, "I don't want to see this movie look good. It's scary because it looks like shit on videotape." And look, there is something to be said for that weird, muddy, almost like where the fuck did this movie come from? But when you see it look like this, I think it's way more effective.
I do too. I do too. I
That's
think
the
it's
actual
way
movie they
more
wanted you to
effective.
see. It's okay to novelty watch a VHS of it, but to claim it as it's really the better version, oh, you're just being
No.
a hipster.
Yeah. I no. I mean, the movie actually in the format I watched it widescreen on a Blu-ray. Like I said, the colors popped. You could really see the camera movement. You could see really the details of what was going on. It looked fucking great. I didn't have any
Mhm.
problem with it at all. And I would prefer to watch it that way than I would some, copy where it looks like somebody threw shit on the lens
Yeah, I've
right
done
before they
enough of
decided to
that.
film it. Yeah, it's disgusting.
So it's a real
No
good
good.
picture, and pay me money, or I'm going to light it on fire and you throw me out of the van. You wrote something on the side of the van. I know he did. Oh, the last house on the left has a little kind of Charles Manson-ish thing too. It's like, is that what Tarantino was talking about in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? That if this Manson shit wouldn't have happened, there's so many ripples. You don't get
Mm-hmm.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that's kind of fucked up. But that's for another day when we finally talk about that 3 hour movie. It's 3 hours, isn't it? But now we're going to
So
talk about a movie that's not even 2 hours long.
let's talk about The
The
Lighthouse.
Lighthouse.
Written and directed by Robert Eggers. Um, I have seen The Northman, but I hadn't seen anything else he'd done.
Okay, so I wanted to summarize this one.
Sure, please do.
So let me see if I got this right. I try to be distinct about it. Okay, so recently relocated from New Jersey to Los Angeles, Daniel becomes the target of a gang Cobra Kai dojo students. When Mr. Miyagi saves him with expert karate skills, Daniel convinces him to defend himself and puts his bullies in their place. That's the Lighthouse, right?
No.
You
What
must
the,
do the work.
what the
Okay.
hell?
Oh no, I'm sorry. That was the Karate Kid. Okay, this is the summary of the Lighthouse for real this time. A young, naive Hollywood studio assistant finally turns the tables on his incredibly abusive producer boss.
No,
Oh, that was Swimming with
that
Sharks.
was
That's
Swimming with Sharks.
close. That's close.
Not
No, we
even
saw The
close.
Lighthouse, which has elements of those other films, but is a whole different ballgame. What is The Lighthouse for real this time?
So the Lighthouse. That was hilarious, by the way. Let me see here. So the Lighthouse again, 2019, Robert Eggers. Two lighthouse keepers try to maintain their sanity, living on a remote, mysterious New England island in the 1890s. Um, yeah, Ephraim Winslow and the grizzled lighthouse keeper Thomas Wake set foot into a secluded and perpetually gray islet off the coast of New England. and they spend 4 weeks of backbreaking in unfavorable work and backbreaking in unfavorable conditions, um, forced to endure their irritating idiosyncrasies, bottled up resentment, and burgeoning hatred. Then, amid bad omens, a furious and unending squall maroons the pale beacon's keepers in the already inhospitable volcanic rock, paving the way for a prolonged period of feral hunger, excruciating agony, manic isolation, and horrible booze-addled visions.
Yeah, see, I thought it was going to be like Fight Club, and they're going to be the same person. I thought
Right?
maybe that could happen up until the end, where I'm getting my predestination flashbacks again. But see, even you can't even sum this movie up in a single paragraph, right?
No,
And yet there's
it's
hardly any dialogue that's necessary in a way.
yeah, I know what you mean by that. It's the
It's very
at first the
image.
first thing I would say to a viewer is if you're going to go in and watch this movie, if you don't handle brogues or accents very well, you probably want to put the subtitles on.
I watched it subtitleless and couldn't
I did
understand
too.
most of what they were saying, but I still
Same.
took that as part of the experience.
I mean, I could hear parts of it, and I got parts of it, but at the same time, it was like if I if I my wife and I were watching it, and we were both like, it might be worth watching this again with subtitles, but I don't know when I will honestly watch it again.
Different movie hiding in there.
I don't think I need to watch it again. Um,
I kept having flashbacks to that MST episode where Frank's locked up and he's quoting Melville, and he's like the salty, salted dog that crawled along, and he's like, "Shut up, Frank." And I felt like it was like that, the movie, in a way, where I was kind of giggling to myself because I'm like, boy, they are just leaning into this. You want to be a fucking salty dog lighthouse guy. Did Willem Dafoe get an Oscar nod at least? Because you could tell he
I,
was swinging for the fence on this one.
I mean, I feel like he definitely deserved one, even if he didn't.
Well, I mean,
Let's see.
A24, maybe they didn't, push for it or something.
Well, it was nominated for one Oscar.
Oh yeah, it was a cinematography Oscar, was
Well,
it not?
and that makes sense. I read that they used old Bausch and Lomb lenses,
Yeah, it's
and like,
1.19 to 1, the ratio
yeah,
of this movie.
yeah. I mean,
Totally bizarre.
it's not even 4:3. It's a box. It's a
Yeah,
straight box.
because one of them jokingly suggested, why don't you use that even narrower format they used when they were switching to talkies momentarily? And what started as a joke, and we know how this goes, becomes the thing that becomes the movie. And that's why you get this kind of really claustrophobic feel.
Very claustrophobic.
And from what I could gather, they still had to shoot on color film. But
Yeah.
what they did with it was interesting to try to
I
look. I
really
don't like
enjoyed.
I don't like digital black and white, but I understand if you don't have a choice to do it that way. But what they did here is the grayscale is affected way differently. So when I started looking at it with my colorblind eyes, I could see how they were doing everything they could with it. And I'm probably watching a compressed version. If I'd seen it at the theater, I'd get the much more of what they were trying to go for. But it made it feel like a much older movie
It
than it
did.
is. I
I mean,
appreciated the sound design a lot too, because remember I bitched
same.
about the bass in Sicario, but here it's more like an analog, old school bass that matches the picture. I'm like, this is how you
It's
do
that
the
horn.
uncurving.
It's that goddamn warning horn that's
Yeah,
constantly going in the movie. You're just
and
like, damn.
it's atmosphere once again, like the other film. But sorry to go off on a little tangent there, but
No, I
digital black
agree
and
with you
white's
on the.
so tricky, but they did a good job with it. Yeah,
I thought they really pulled it off. I thought that the black and white and the way that they did the contrasting on it, especially there were moments, especially with Defoe's face, where it was just
right.
some of the most bizarre and arresting imagery I've seen in a movie in a long fucking. And
No,
he did that in the North. He did that in the Northman too, even with color.
ah.
Especially with Defoe. He just, I don't know what it is about Defoe's face, but it was wild.
I was going to say,
Um,
what happens if you see the Lighthouse in a 1.85 in color? Is it any less effective?
I think so because
I think it might be better.
I think it's because I think it's this idea of like capturing
They
it
want an
feels
old photography feel. Yeah.
yeah, it feels very gritty, like you're like somebody's actually capturing this going on, and the young dude does all the grunt work, the older dude runs the lighthouse. It reminded me of a 40s horror movie a lot. It had that universal
Hmm.
40s horror picture feel to it.
It reminded me of something from the early 80s. Like if I had seen this movie before I was 10, like if it had existed then, I would have had a weird fascination with it because it would have been like, what the fuck is that? It's
Uh-huh.
just odd.
It's very singular.
And the
It's
childhood
very singular.
imagination filling in all the gaps, I can only imagine what a little kid would think of this movie because I don't think they'd be bored by it. I think it's eerie and weird enough that it kind of sucks you in. Of course, I'm sitting here kind of nodding out over and over again, but a lot of time when movies are and things are darkly lit, it's why I couldn't watch the X Files. I always fell asleep. Anything that's too dark, it puts me out. But I don't
I
think
had
I don't
I
think it
had
would be
no I
actually.
had no problem staying. Like I was engrossed in this film. I
Oh,
couldn't
I
look
was
away
in and
from
out all over the
I
place,
I couldn't look away from it. I
but I
thought it was fucking
appreciate it.
brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely brilliant. The lighting is so good. Defoe looks like a fucking madman through most of the movie. The movie's kind of super fucking gross.
Yeah, it's
Like there's
almost
a lot
like
of there's
okay,
like
guys, I
yeah,
guess
there's
we
a lot
have
of
to go
master a
there.
lot of masturbation and weird fetishizing going on, and
Oh, maybe there's some gay coding in the film that
maybe when he grabs that gull and beats it to death, it's like God damn, it's fucking
that's
brutal.
that's probably the most intense part of the movie. Yeah,
Yeah, and you also know that from that point on, nothing. It's all going to go bad.
yeah, it's like
Like
oh, look what you did.
that's
Yeah,
the fucking omen that you brought down upon all of us. And sure enough, here comes the storm, and here comes at one point in the movie they're drinking fucking turpentine with honey
yeah, because they ran out of
because they ran out
alcohol.
of fucking booze. You know.
And it's kind of like Master and Commander in that respect, where if you don't know all the stuff about seafaring life and
Mm-hmm.
existence, this movie's providing you with enough to know that when he kills that gull, shit's about to go pretty bad.
Pretty bad.
As if it
Yeah.
wasn't already.
Yeah.
Because which is a bleaker film? I don't know. They're both bleak in their own weird way.
I think the
One's a more
lighthouse is
naturalistic
way. I
bleak,
think the
and
lighthouse is way bleaker.
one's a more really specifically super goth bleak. Like what I was telling you before the pod, where when they were trying to get Willem Dafoe attached to the film, and the director's like, "Look, it's my way or the highway. This is how we're doing the movie. This is how I'm telling you to do each line and every scene." And then he was like, "Oh, that's kind of unusual for a two-hander. Usually if it's just the two actors, we get to work it out ourselves." But he had a very specific
Mm-hmm.
idea for it. It's very deliberate filmmaking.
He
You talk
he
about
does.
plotted
Yeah.
out shit. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that, and that tracks with what I saw in the Northman. And I imagine once I watch the Vitch, it'll probably be the same thing. Um, I think he's a master filmmaker. I
Oh,
think
he's very good at what he
I
does.
think he's
Both of
really good
him
at what he
and the
fucking does.
DP, they're both a good team
Um,
there. Yeah.
yeah, the diving into the bottle. They seem to switch personalities during the movie.
That's why
They
I thought
go
it's like
from
Fight Club. Yeah, where it was like,
they
is this
yeah
the same actor?
yeah exactly. They go from being commandeering to not, and so on and
And
so
in a
forth.
way,
And
they kind of are the same guy. In a way, you can
I
interpret so much.
guess
It's so it's very vague in that respect.
I like that the mermaid is super fucking creepy. I could have done without seeing the mermaid's vagina or him having
Yeah,
sex with it.
I mean, obviously, there's
It
some
was
women
fucking
issues
wild.
going
This
on in
movie is
this
fucking
story.
wild, dude.
That's part of what this story is about. These two people are stuck at the fucking lighthouse, and they're
Mm-hmm.
both weirdos,
Mm-hmm.
and they both
You
have the
you know from the
strangest
beginning of the movie
accents.
though, right away from the beginning of the movie, you know that the movie is going to end in violence.
Hmm. And you
Like
don't
you have
think about
there's
Twilight at all, right? Robert
no
Pattinson
fuck
goes
no. He's
beyond any of that. Yeah.
dude. He's holding screen with Defoe, who's the fucking killer actor, and the both of them are just. There are points in that movie where they're both just tearing it up. They're just acting the fuck out of it and really nailing it. It's another thing I think Eggers like even if he had a specific way of saying here's how I want it, he had a damn good reason.
Oh yeah, it's very deliberate filmmaking,
Mm-hmm. It's a very fucked up movie with
to say the least.
some astounding imagery and covering some very weird, um, not only cinematic but just thematic
Hmm.
things. It 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 it's so much despair and dread. It's just it's
Yeah, it
90
almost
minutes of
became
just
comical to me. It became so much,
despair and
yeah.
dread and gritty and grisly and
And
just like
sometimes
holy
when they're
fucking
freaking out, the
shit.
faces they're making almost like they're making goofy faces, and I'm like, is this supposed to be satire? Is there dark humor somewhere in this thing? Or is it just
I
my
mean,
coping mechanism of having to
I
sit through
couldn't
this
tell.
thing?
I couldn't tell. It was brilliant, but at times it felt like I was losing my fucking mind.
Can you
I was
imagine
just like,
watching this shit
what
in the
the
theater?
fuck? Yeah, no, I can't at
Oh,
all.
that's the effective way. Watching it at home and it's one thing, but
Mm-hmm.
being stuck in
Mm-hmm.
the dark theater with this, you'd feel like you're stuck in that fucking lighthouse with them. And so about an hour into the movie, you start to go, "Oh yeah, this is horror." if I
Oh
was
yeah.
wondering if I was wondering if this was a horror movie, yeah,
Yeah, this is horror. This is straight up horror.
it's unconventional because it's a thriller. It's real pot boiler, but it's a horror movie in so much as Eraserhead is a horror movie. You could tell that they've watched a lot of David Lynch movies.
that 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 scene, there's that scene where he calls upon Triton and curses Robert Pattinson.
Yeah, and I'm like, who are you to have this kind of power over the fucking ocean?
He is just fucking, but then
That's the Oscar moment, I thought. Yeah.
later when he catches Pattinson outside and he's nude and he's got him by the throat and the light is he opens his mouth and the light is coming from his eyes and shit. It's just like,
Apparently based
good
on a
God,
poem I saw. Yeah.
this is some of the most amazing imagery. Holy fucking shit. Fantastic.
Because while as David Lynch will create the art in the paintings and sculptures himself and then put them into the movie, what they're doing here is they're taking like what most everybody else does and like, oh, that imagery you were talking about was somebody else's painting, or and this is like a conglomeration of Edgar Allan Poe and a little bit of Lovecraft, and so much like Texas Chainsaw was a big conglomeration of all that stuff. This is like another conglomeration of.
Mm,
But if you're a Tim Burton fan, how are you not loving this? If you're a David
yeah.
Lynch fan, this is probably right up your
This is
alley.
right on your, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's like watching two guys who are stuck in literal hell on earth
hmm
and they're losing their minds. They're drinking themselves into insanity. They hate each other, but they also tolerate each other.
hmm
It's a fucking wild move. That whole argument about the fucking lobster. You like my lobster? Admit
Oh
it.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
fuck you. I don't have to say nothing. That's when he curses him.
Those standout moments.
Um, so I
Well,
guess Pattinson and Defoe, they barely spoke a word to each other on set, and they were
yeah, you
exhausted.
save it for the screen.
Yeah, they were exhausted after shooting because it was so physically demanding. So
Oh,
they
I
didn't even like hang out afterwards.
hmm Yeah, I mean, it's a great film. It's not a movie for me. Like you were saying, it's not something you're going to revisit a lot. But also, I'm kind of in that same boat too. But I suspect you're probably going to have a higher rating than me. To me, it feels like somebody's been watching The Shining a little bit too much. We're locked up, we can't get away, and now I have an axe and a limp, and I'm chasing you by the end.
Well, but The Shining has a supernatural aspect that I don't think that this does.
Well, he
This,
opens up the light, and we get all
yeah, that's
the
true.
Eraserhead there
That's
too.
true, but there's not a. I think it's more like nature than it is a sinister
Mhm.
hotel, right? Like I think it's more like nature and God and that type of the sea type of thing.
Well, yeah, it's
And
the
again,
lighthouse first.
and again,
It's the
the theme of
overlook, the
solitude
lighthouse.
making you
Yeah.
insane is definitely shared
Yeah,
within
if I
these
was the
movies.
elevator pitch, I'd be like, it's The
Uh,
Shining and a lighthouse with two Jack
yeah,
Nicholsons.
maybe a little bit. Yeah, I could kind of see that. But look, it's not a movie like I said I'm going to watch often, but
Yeah, it sticks with you.
I'm glad I watched it because
Yeah,
it's going to stick
true.
with me for a long fucking time.
Oh yeah, I don't need to watch it a second time.
And I think he's a fucking brilliant filmmaker.
I liked it
Um,
a lot more than some other movies that we haven't watched on the pod, like Hereditary and things that get these big, acclaim. Where I'm just like, eh. But this one, I'm like, it's still not for me, but I like it a lot more than some of those other ones that I've seen like that.
hmm
So
hmm yeah, and it like I enjoyed it. I thought it's really singular. It's beautifully shot. The performances are great. Um, I love the lighting in it, and I love a lot of what they like when he reaches into the at the end where he opens up the lighthouse lantern and he reaches in and then they cut to him and he's basically just being picked to death by gulls and shit. It's like Jesus
Yeah.
Christ. Um,
It's going to be interesting to see what these two
fascinating.
keep doing as they keep making more and more.
I
Because that's
think
only movie number 2, and movie 2
yeah
is usually, movie 2 of Shyamalan is Unbreakable, so he came a
yeah
long way from that. So I'm
I
very
I
curious
think
to see what else they make, but I probably don't need to revisit The Lighthouse anytime soon. But I
I
would
hear you.
recommend it to people who like weird, gothic, strange horror
Yeah, I
movies.
think if you're into singular films that are really different and stand out and are well made and are, I mean, this is really good filmmaking craft. It's well made.
Yeah, it's well made. I mean, singular. I guess I felt like it was more like a bunch of stuff I'd seen before, but happening all in one movie. So, and I guess that's its difference too.
I don't. I mean, look, every story is going to have elements of other things. I think that what I mean by singular is the fact that you're not going to see another movie like that, done in that
Mhm.
format, done in black and white,
That's
done with those
true.
actors,
Closest
done
you
in
get
that,
is Tormented, maybe.
done in all this, and just the weird sort of insanity that slowly takes the two of them over is
Send us your Lighthouse
fascinating.
picks next week.
You
The
know,
Fog. No,
so
The Fog would be a good choice, but I'm going to give this movie a 2.
wow,
I like it, but I'm not revisiting it again. It's leaning towards 2.5, but it it's pretty heavy handed, so
I
it's
completely
not for
disagree.
me.
I'm gonna go three and a half. I'm gonna go three and a half.
And
It's
I
not something I'm gonna.
understand that just for craft alone, but
Yeah,
I would
it's
have
just
liked the story in there.
extremely well made, and I think there was a story. It's like talk radio. You know,
Yeah,
it's
that's true.
all it's a set piece. You
Hmm.
know,
But yeah, I
um,
found myself drifting off many times and having to
mm,
restart it, and yeah.
mm,
But I can imagine seeing it in the theater would probably be a lot more gripping, and the performances are, it's good. But it's weird because it's like I never want to bag on anything because I know how hard it is to make something, and even if I absolutely hated something, I wouldn't go off on it being a complete piece of shit. And I don't
mm,
feel that way about this. This is a good movie. It's just not something I'm watching again anytime soon. But boy,
mm.
do you keep thinking about it. It is a weird
That's
fucking
why
film.
I gave it three and a half
So
stars.
audience, you
You know,
watch it.
not something I'm gonna watch over and over again, but at the same time, I'm like, fuck, that
Mhm.
was. I'm also not gonna watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre over and over again.
Yeah,
You
I'm
know,
good on that one
you know,
too for quite some
you know
time.
what I mean. So but they're both fine films. They're both well made.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I like Get Out a lot more. That's one I
yeah,
find myself putting on more often.
I enjoyed that one quite a bit. I thought was I think my third viewing of it, and I really enjoyed it.
Told you not to go in that house. See, it's the same thing though, right? They told not
Told you not to go in that house.
to watch
Fucking
prom
did.
night, save time.
Hmm.
Certain formulas surviving these movies. Even The Lighthouse. You don't kill the fucking albatross, man. It's not good.
All right. Well, what do you got for me this time?
Okay, so we're concluding our Halloween season,
We are indeed.
and we're gonna make at least on my pick. We're going a little bit lighter this time because we did the '90s with Scream, did the classic, and we went back to bleak ass '70s. So where else did that lead us? I mean, it's the '80s, right? And
Hmm.
what year we like to dwell in on this podcast? 1981. For some reason, we keep going back there over and over again. So why not go back there again and do something very lighthearted, the palate cleanser, and then we can get on to some much more lighter fare in the future. And that movie next week is a movie I like more than The Exorcist because I'm crazy. 1981, Linda Blair in Hell Night.
Hell Night.
Hell Night.
Oh boy. Okay.
Very,
Sure.
very
Sure.
light.
Okay.
Light,
Interesting.
easy. I won't say anything about it so you can go in, relatively blind and be like, what
God,
the
I've
fuck
seen
am
it, but
I watching?
it's been a long fucking time since I've seen that movie. Yeah, okay.
It's got a Van Patten in it. So.
Uh-huh. It's another Van Patten movie. What the fuck is with you and the Van Pattens?
Oh, they're
Uh,
fun.
Yeah, you get that master link on your
I'm
mind.
telling you, it's that Master Ninja thing.
Um, okay, so I'm going to give you something from a little bit more recent. Something that our boys over at Reels covered a while ago.
Ooh.
Something that I watched and quite found both hilarious and enjoyable. I'm going to give you The Pope's Exorcist, starring Russell
Oh,
Crowe.
oh, okay. See, that's funny because I gave you the movie I like more than The Exorcist, and you gave me a
Uh,
movie about exorcism. The Pope's
so,
Exorcist.
The Pope's Exorcist.
And
You get to watch Crow zip around on a scooter, beep beep, and take an
what
Italian. It'll
more
be
do you want
hilarious,
from a movie? Wasn't that the quote or something?
right?
I'll tell you right now, I'm going into this one jaded, which is good because it'll see if it gets me around because that's a genre of horror I don't give a shit about. The religious horror, don't care. So it always gives that extra challenge to be like, okay, but you can still be a good movie and a good story in there, and then I can walk away from it going, motherfucker, they got me. So I'm always open to see if the Pope's Exorcist could be a new holiday favorite right alongside Violent Night.
Uh, yeah, I'll leave you. I won't color it, but I have an opinion on it. And like I said, I enjoyed it the first time I watched it. So we'll see what you think.
So in The Lighthouse Part 2, turns out Willem Dafoe was actually still alive.
Actually, he was Leatherface the whole time.
Oh shit. Leatherface in a lighthouse.
Lighthouse
The New
Leatherface.
England Lighthouse. Well, I'm sure there's a slasher in there that hasn't been made yet.
Yep, we'll
Maybe it's
figure
the
it out.
Mutilator's pretty close to that description, though.
Yeah, the Light Keeper,
Another
Leatherface Light
movie I
Keeper.
probably won't make Cliff watch anytime soon, The Mutilator. Because
Hmm,
I have to watch these things too. But that one's actually kind of funny in a weird, stupid way. So, what do we have next time? We have Hell Night in the Pope's Exorcist for our big episode 40.
that's right. And then we're off to the races, and then I think we're going to probably do a little holiday
Yeah,
set
a
too,
little,
eventually
little
too.
holiday cheer around the corner where
That's right.
I might make Cliff watch movies like Black Christmas and Silent Night, Deadly Night. No, no. Even though those technically would be Christmas films, I'm going to leave the horror over here in October.
Well, you're definitely watching Fat Man, so
Yeah,
get ready for it. All right. Well, Dave Marty. Until next week.
cool.
All right, later.